I wasn't supposed to be in that car, not really. It was just another ride, one of the countless I had taken over the years. I hadn't expected anything to happen, nothing at all. A simple ride home after a long day, that's all it should have been. But there's something about the way we meet people in the strangest moments, isn't there? How we can find our lives shifted in the most unexpected of places. I guess that's what happened with Aaron. I had ordered a ride, tired and with my mind still heavy from the workday. The city around me blurred with streetlights and the low hum of the traffic, all muffled by the car's quiet interior. It's funny, isn't it? How when you're tired, every little sound feels amplified. The click of the seatbelt as I fastened it, the soft hum of the air conditioning, and his voice, warm and steady, breaking through the quiet when he said, "How's your night going?" It was a polite, light question, nothing special. Yet something in the way he asked made me pause, the words somehow pulling me out of my own head. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered for a moment in the rearview mirror. It wasn't intrusive, but I could feel it, like he was searching for something. Maybe I was reading too much into it. "Long day," I answered, offering a half smile. I didn't expect him to push, but he did. "Yeah, I get that. What do you do?" His voice had a warmth to it, the kind of tone that made you feel like he actually cared. I paused, a simple question, but one I hadn't expected to answer so easily. "I work in marketing," I said. "It's tiring, a lot of decisions, a lot of pressure, and not enough time to think about what really matters, you know." There it was. I hadn't meant to say that, not to a stranger, but there was something about him that made it easy. He nodded, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror briefly, his gaze steady and understanding. "I get it," he said quietly. "Sometimes we get so caught up in the hustle, we forget to stop and breathe." I looked at him in the mirror, then really looked. There was a quiet wisdom in his eyes, an understanding that felt like more than just words. His gaze held mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I couldn't help but wonder if he too was tired of the world spinning around him too fast. But then the moment passed, and we continued on in silence, the city passing by like a blur outside the window. It wasn't supposed to go any deeper than that, not really. But something shifted in the air as we drove through the streets. The silence between us wasn't empty, it felt filled with unspoken words. I found myself stealing glances at him in the rearview mirror, my eyes lingering just a little longer than necessary. It was nothing overt, just subtle moments, a word here, a glance there. And yet, with each passing mile, I felt a strange connection, as if the space between us had been closed by something invisible, something I couldn't quite explain. "I've been driving for a while now," Aaron said after a while, his voice breaking the silence again. "I don't know, sometimes it feels like you get to know people just from the way they sit in the back seat." I wasn't sure where he was going with that, but the curiosity in his voice made me lean in just a little. "Do you mean you can tell something about a person by how they are when they're in your car?" I asked, intrigued, despite myself. He glanced at me through the mirror, his eyes lingering a bit longer this time. "Yeah, sometimes. I mean, people don't realize it, but they give a lot away. The way they hold themselves, the way they breathe, even the way they look out the window." It sounded a little strange, but something in his tone made me want to believe him. I swallowed, a sudden knot in my throat, feeling like I had been caught in some kind of web. His words were simple, but there was a depth to them that made me feel like I had just stepped into something I couldn't quite control. I felt the pull then, the quiet tension between us, something I hadn't expected but couldn't seem to ignore. He wasn't being flirtatious in any overt way, not at all. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes lingered, that felt like he was seeing me in a way no one had in years. I shifted in my seat, feeling the warmth of the car settle around me like a blanket. The city lights outside blurred into soft streaks as we sped down the road, and for a brief moment everything felt suspended in time, just the two of us in this car, in this moment. And then he spoke again, his voice softer now, like he was confiding in me. You ever feel like the world's just moving too fast? Like you're running after something, but you don't even know what it is? There it was again, the pull. I nodded, slowly, not sure what to say. It was as if he had reached into the deepest part of me, finding something I wasn't sure I even understood myself. But I wanted to say something. I wanted to share something with him. Yeah, I said softly. I feel like that all the time. It's like there's so much to do, so much to be, but it never feels enough. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was only the quiet hum of the car, the sound of the tires against the pavement. His eyes were in the mirror again, catching mine with that same gaze, holding it just a little longer than necessary. And I felt it, a kind of vulnerability in that moment, one that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. We were getting closer to my destination, and yet the feeling between us had only grown stronger. I could feel it, this unspoken connection, this strange intimacy that seemed to bind us together even as I knew it shouldn't. And then, just as the car slowed down to approach my street, Aaron did something unexpected. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his gaze piercing through me in a way that made my heart skip a beat. I think you're running from something, he said, his voice low, almost like a whisper. The words hit me hard, harder than I expected. I froze, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. How could he know that? How could he have possibly known what I was running from? My own breath caught in my chest, and I felt a jolt of panic rise inside me. I wanted to say something, anything to push back, but the words wouldn't come. Aaron's gaze softened, though, and I saw the glimmer of understanding in his eyes. You don't have to run, he said quietly. You know that, right? I couldn't answer. Him, not in that moment. The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I realized that somewhere along the way, the simple ride had turned into something far more complicated. There was no going back from this moment. And that's when it hit me. The betrayal wasn't in what he'd done, but in what I had allowed myself to feel. I had allowed myself to get too close, too involved in a connection that wasn't mine to claim. With a final glance in the rearview mirror, Aaron said, "You'll be okay." And just like that, the ride was over. I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of everything still hanging in the air between us. I wasn't sure what had just happened. Maybe it was nothing more than a fleeting moment of connection. Maybe it was something more. But one thing was clear, I couldn't unsee it, couldn't forget how that simple ride had turned into something I couldn't understand, something I had to let go of. As I walked away, I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. The connection had been real, but it had also been fleeting, like the blur of lights in the city that disappeared as quickly as they came. But I had learned something that night about myself, about what I needed, and about the fragile nature of the connections we make. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it.